Why can't America build a $20,000 truck anymore? There's something that's always bothered me about the American truck market. A few decades ago, you could walk into a dealership and buy a basic pickup truck for the price that didn't require you to take out a second mortgage. You didn't get a giant touchscreen, you didn't get 14 powered seats, you didn't get heated steering wheel, adaptive cruise control, or a camera pointed at your face. You got a truck. Something with a bed, an engine, four wheels, and hopefully air conditioning. And today, try finding a $20,000 truck. It's impossible. So the question is, why can't America build a $20,000 truck anymore? Interestingly enough, I think a company called REO might have the answer. The $20,000 truck disappeared. Let's look into the obvious. New trucks have gotten expensive, like really expensive. And yes, inflation is part of that. Safety regulations have gotten more complicated, emission regulations have gotten more complicated, materials cost more, labor costs more, and modern vehicles are dramatically more complicated than trucks that people were buying 20 or 30 years ago. But that's not the full story, because I think there's another factor that gets overlooked. The industry figured out a way to make people pay more. If people are willing to pay $40, $50, $60,000 or even more for a pickup, then why would they focus on a $20,000 truck? Especially when the more expensive trucks are more profitable. That's just business. I'm not saying every manufacturer is sitting around in conference rooms saying, let's rip people off, but I do think the industry has gradually moved toward a model where a cheap, basic pickup truck simply isn't attractive to build anymore. And that's where I think REO gets interesting. REO is taking a different approach. REO isn't trying to build the most technologically advanced vehicle on the planet. They're trying to build something that makes sense. And one of the ways that they're doing that is being very careful about where they spend their money. That sounds obvious, but think about how much money goes into developing a modern vehicle. A manufacturer doesn't just pay for the physical part. They have to engineer it, test it, certify it, run crash tests, run emissions testing, meet federal regulations, create tooling, develop software, validate every component, and all that costs money before we would sell the first truck. REO's strategy appears to be, why reinvent something that already exists and is certified? You do this by using parts that are already certified. This is the one thing that I find most interesting about REO. Instead of spending enormous amounts of money developing and certifying every component from scratch, they're looking for components that already meet the necessary requirements. For example, if you can source an engine that already has an EPA certification, you don't necessarily have to spend years and millions of dollars developing your own emission system from scratch. You're leveraging something that already exists, and you potentially could save enormous amounts of money. The same philosophy can apply to transmissions, electronics, switches, sensors, and other components. And this is where I think people misunderstand cost cutting and what that actually means. Cost cutting doesn't necessarily mean use cheap parts. Sometimes it means not paying twice for the same engineering. If someone already has spent money developing and certifying a component, why would you spend millions of dollars doing the exact same thing? That's not cost cutting, that's just cutting out duplication. Even the little things cost money. REO's taking that philosophy pretty far. There are little things in the vehicle that most of us never think about that become very expensive. Take the logo on the steering wheel. You might think it's just a logo, but if you're the manufacturer, that logo means tooling, molds, intellectual property, supplier agreements, testing, manufacturing processes, and additional parts. If you use a component without adding another expensive manufacturing process simply for the sake of putting your logo on it, that means money you don't have to spend. And that mentality, I think, is what REO is trying to embrace. Don't spend money just because the truck looks expensive. Spend money where it actually matters. But where does that difference actually get? But there's a difference between cheap and inexpensive. That's probably the most important part of this argument. I don't want a $20,000 truck that's garbage. I don't want a truck with a cheap engine that lasts 80,000 miles. I don't want suspension components that wear out immediately. I don't want a transmission that can't handle the truck, and I definitely don't want a truck that sacrifices safety just to hit a price target. I want something that's inexpensive because it's simple. That's a completely different thing. Look at some of the vehicles that have developed reputations for being incredibly reliable. They're not often complicated. They use proven engines, proven transmissions, simple interiors, simple electronics, and the parts that have been around long enough that the manufacturer knows exactly what they're dealing with. That's what I think REO has the opportunity to do. Do we really need all of this? Think about a modern pickup. You get a massive screen, power everything, heated and cooled seats, fancy lighting, electronic tailgates, complex driver assist, multiple cameras, huge wheels, and a whole lot of technology that simply just didn't exist 20 years ago. None of these things are inherently bad, but every single one of them costs money, and every component is something else that could eventually break. REO seems to be asking a pretty simple question. What if we just didn't have that stuff in the truck? What if instead of having a $50,000 truck that feels like a luxury car, we built a $20,000 to $25,000 truck that was designed to do truck things? Carry stuff, tow something, go to work, get you home, and do that without all the computer science degree to fix it. And this is what I think traditional manufacturers have a problem. Ford, GM, and Toyota and all the other manufacturers have enormous advantages. They have decades of experience, they have huge supplier networks, and they have massive factories. They have engineering departments that employ thousands of people. So theoretically, they should be able to build an inexpensive truck better than anyone else. But that's not necessarily what the market rewards them for doing. If Ford can sell a $45,000 Maverick instead of a $20,000 basic pickup, that's a pretty compelling business decision. If the customers keep buying them, then there's very little reason for Ford to go backwards. That's part of what I think consumers need to understand. Companies don't price vehicles solely based upon what they cost to build. They price them based upon what the market will pay. And people will continue buying more expensive vehicles, and manufacturers have a reason to keep moving forward in the market. But could REO actually break that cycle? That's what makes this interesting. REO doesn't have to beat Ford at building a truck. They don't have to out-engineer Toyota, and they don't have to have the fanciest interior. They just have to build a truck that gives people what they actually want at that price that they can afford. And if they can accomplish that by doing already certified components and avoiding unnecessarily engineering expenses and keeping the vehicle very simple and refusing to spend money on things that just don't matter, then maybe there's actually a path for a genuinely affordable American pickup. And honestly, I think that's what makes REO so interesting. Because they don't necessarily are trying to reinvent the truck. They're trying to reinvent how cheaply you could build one. So that's the $20,000 question. Now, I don't know if REO can actually deliver a $20,000 truck. But neither does anyone else until these trucks are actually produced and sold. So there's enormous challenges. Regulations aren't going away. Supply chains aren't free. Factories aren't free. And labor isn't free. And getting a new vehicle through the entire regulatory process is incredibly expensive. But if REO can find ways of using existing certified parts, then they could save millions developing new ones. So maybe they can just simply simplify the vehicle and focus their money on things that actually make the truck better. Then maybe the $20,000 truck isn't dead. Maybe the problem is just that people haven't built one in a long time. And if REO succeeds, that could force the entire industry to make a very uncomfortable question. If they could build a good truck without all the extra expense, why couldn't we? And honestly, I'd love to see that competition. Because America doesn't need another $70,000 truck. Maybe what we need is just a really good $20,000 truck again. So tell me what you think down below. And if you want to reserve you a REO, use my link down below. And then I'll see y'all in the next one.